Today, we're tackling a topic that is flying under the radar, probably because it's not exactly popular to discuss, and frankly, some will violently disagree. There's now research pointing to a growing productivity gap that's affecting almost all of us. One study looked at remote work and found a significant drop in productivity compared to in-office workers. Another showed that using AI is actually making us dumber. On their own, each of them is worrying, but combined, this will lead probably to a major issue for us. So it is time that we start talking about it openly and honestly. And now, enjoy.
Remote workers per day work an average of 2.5 hours less.
There's a large difference to me, not necessarily in working hours, but in what's happening in those hours. I would rather take a team of people working 6 hours a day, not checking their phones and not wasting their time, than people 10 hours a day in the office who are half the time asleep on their phone.
You know, probably very likely work less, maybe learn less on the job. Plus, hey, this AI thing is kind of happening and it's making us a little bit dumber, or maybe a lot dumber overall. If you combine those two things together, that's a significant productivity hit we're actually currently experiencing and taking.
Tony, you have been letting out the inner scientist lately. You've been reading some studies and you've been quite interested in the nature of work and how productive people are, which is fantastic because that's something I'm also very interested in. And you've actually devised quite a little bit of an idea about where we're actually heading and how to deal with this. So I think for today, what I think is really interesting is kind of your observation, but also what you've seen, what studies have shown, what's happening with remote work, what's happening with AI, and where we're actually going.
Yeah, absolutely. The thing is, so both of these topics, right? So spoiler, I'm going to talk about why remote work isn't good for you. I'm going to talk about why AI maybe isn't good for you. Both of those topics, a lot of people throw away the headphones right now or their phone or whatever and just walk away. It's like, I don't even want to hear you talking about this. But I think there is as I mentioned, not talked about massive productivity loss that actually needs to just be addressed. It needs to be addressed because it's happening. And just because it's maybe not woke enough to, think the other way, shouldn't prevent us from talking about it. Right. And then happy for people to disagree. I think you and I will, partially play devil's advocate here in this conversation, but also partially, believe also obviously kind of is sometimes the opposite. So, and we'll peel the onion and see kind of where we land in the end, right?
I kind of have an idea of where we're going. And I know that this will trigger some people, and some people will strongly disagree with that. I think that's good. So maybe that makes for an actually more productive topic. But I do know that some people will kind of try to turn on you with a pitchfork after. And some people will be like, finally, someone's saying this. So go ahead, Tony.
I can see many people like, see, Stephen, I knew this was right, and then said this podcast. So the first thing is remote work is not working. So, obviously we came through COVID, and that's where it was required. Before that, remote work was kind of a rarity actually, right? After COVID, it really got locked into mainstream. We're now 4 years after COVID or 3 years after COVID? I kind of don't keep track anymore. But those remote work habits are still around. We see a big movement now, RTO, return to office, both as a war cry of CEOs and a war cry of people that basically, are pushing against that, right? And now we're kind of coming to the point where people in universities and labor departments and so forth are now finally kind of getting the funds into, including this in their little research. And we had some really interesting data coming out. We'll link the piece here. You can jump to the article itself where it's kind of talked about, or the source that sits behind that. You'll find, Bart will insert the whole thing. So the main headline here is that report found that, same for same. So full-time workers, remote and in office, remote workers per day work an average of 2.5 hours less per day. That's what the research found. And we'll dive into this a little bit more. The other very interesting thing, and which is why this is so pertinent, I think, for everyone listening here, what the research found is that remote work is, a little bit an age thing. It's not at all a gender thing. I actually found that remote work for women leads to more chores for the women at home. Kind of that was actually kind of one finding, kind of that is kind of then being put back basically. But one finding that really stood out for me was like people with a bachelor degree, 40% of the surveyed population works remotely, and for people with a higher degree, so a master's and so forth, actually 45% work remotely. So what does that mean? This is obviously, and also has been in COVID, white collar privilege, right? Kind of that you could I didn't need to go to the store. I didn't need to go to, be a nurse in a hospital. So going to the store meaning working there. It was just not my job. I could just stay at home, go online, open Zoom, and be productive, right? So this whole remote thing is really a white collar thing, meaning basically all your colleagues, if you're listening, all your colleagues around you and yourself, basically, that's what it is. Before I go on, what's your reaction to the 2.5 hours less work today per day?
So first of all, this is staggering, right? As in, depending on how you take it, you're like, well, this is about a third of a working day. It's actually like 2.7 or so, which is basically exactly one working day. So meaning your people work 1/3 less. Some people will be like, well, this is not surprising at all. I've been telling you all along, as you said before. And some people will be like, well, I don't actually believe that. What are these hours and what does that mean? So obviously, as I understand it, that study concludes that people work less. This does not necessarily mean that they produce less. So one thinking about that, or one objection could be, well, people just manage to do more in less time, and then they use the rest of the time to just take a nap or whatever. But at the end of the day, and you might think of that as you want. You're like, no, he should also work those hours more. That's a different point. But if they do produce the same output, then who cares actually? Like nobody's harmed. And if you do call them back to the office, they're still not going to produce more. So you're kind of in a catch-22 where either you let them be in the home office and just spend less time but producing the same result, or you call them back to the office where they will still not be more productive.
Yeah.
And that's one way of looking at it. And I'm not sure if that's the case.
Let's go through some of those things because they also went through my mind. Actually, the first thing that went through my mind was like BS. Like 2.5 hours, come on, that's just not true. Like the data must be wrong, yada, yada. So this is a legit source, like a seriously legit source. I think from the US Labor Department, actually. And, we have the sources here. You can kind of jump and look for yourself. So there is some truth to this thing. Let's just discount it a little bit. Maybe it's on 2.5 hours. Maybe it's like 2 hours, whatever. It's still a substantial period. Even 1 hour would be substantial in my period, right? I think this finding this size is too big to just be like, there's a rounding error. I don't think so, right? Then the next thing, hey, the people that are working in the office, they're just in the office for 8 hours, but they're just really there and just killing time. Like they're not necessarily more productive. They're just killing time. If I'm pretending. But yeah, I think there's a massive thing in Germany and in a couple of other states, less so here in Denmark, I would say. But there's this thing, you shouldn't be leaving before your boss. And, if you do leave before 6 p.m., it's being, poorly looked at. And therefore, really, your productive time won't change. You will just spend less time in the shitty office, basically, right? I think this in itself is like an issue. Like, obviously, this is an issue, right? I'm not sure, this is a location-dependent thing to actually work on. I think there's also something to it like, wow, which kind of goes into the other thing that I've kind of been thinking about and you and I have been kind of talking about is like, there's this notion called Parkinson's law, which basically dictates that whatever the task is and however much time you give someone to complete the task, this will be the time that they use in order to complete the task, right? So and this was originally, I think it's from the 60s, This was originally used to mock bureaucracy in the government because they're like so inefficient. But by now it found itself into project management. Like overly generous deadlines produce lower productivity, slower work, right? And the same actually also in personal productivities. Not having tight deadlines leads to, being less ambitious, being less focused around this stuff, right? So I think there are other pieces playing into this whole thing in terms of productivity that, the location from where you work can't change. But I think it's like, we shouldn't confuse those two things. Kind of that's really kind of my point actually about this, right? So if you have 2 more hours to work, my very strong belief is that in those 2 hours, you will be able to do more work for the business. That's in a productive manner. And surely there's a flattening of the curve, right? I'm not saying everyone should be working 12 hours. I don't work 12 hours. And at some point, you will just be less and less productive, obviously. But come on, like from 6 to 8 hours, are you still there? Yeah, like you totally will be productive in that time, right? And so I think there's a gap. I think this is creating a gap. I'm not sure kind of how you see this, but I think there's a gap that's kind of created.
No, I think in theory I would agree. There's this Parkinson's law. There's the law that basically, and it's also been my experience, by the way. So where however long people have, that's the time that they will use. And I absolutely, as someone who's been part of that, but also has been leading organizations, I absolutely despise FaceTime. I think it's not just archaic and like boomer-like, but it's also just a terrible idea. For the productivity of your team, it is a very German thing, though. So what I've seen is what this can do to organizations and to teams who just expand and create the workday in such a way that they will just naturally always be done at 6. And if they know that they have to stay until 6:30 or 7 to leave after their boss, that is how long they will take for that thing. And most likely even unconsciously so. And that's what makes it so pervasive, is that it's not like you can easily tell someone, hey, just be more productive. They'll be like, no, but I'm already trying, right? I'm already prioritizing, I'm already doing all that. Maybe they're not doing it the right way, but even people with good intentions kind of make it so that their day always ends at 7 and they're done with the thing that they were supposed to do.
Yeah.
Isn't that weird, by the way? So how we have this time frame, which is basically like a standard time frame for most workers, and for some magical reasons, most of their day actually ends then. And then they go home and they're like, I had a good day. That doesn't make any sense, actually.
So I think logically this doesn't make sense, but like from a psychological human perspective, it actually does make sense. So having a frame of reference of where you do work, that's a good thing for you and your productivity. Switching to work mode when you go to the office, that's super helpful. Right? There's even studies out there that if you have a working desk in your bedroom, that you will sleep poorly because of the your mind is a little bit in work mode basically in the same time, right? Because you're in the same location. So there's something to the just other people being around and the accountability that comes with it, right? And the study didn't necessarily kind of says that, but a couple of other things have been suggested that people, what are they spending those 2.5 hours that on? Well, they're watching TV or doing some other leisurely kind of activities, right? It's not that they're going to the gym or going to the dentist or something like that. It's like they're just screwing around for that time, right? And then I think to a degree, and this is kind of probably going to be an issue if this whole AI acceleration of productivity really actually happens, but it just hasn't yet. I'll just be clear, it hasn't yet. But every single time we execute a productivity increase for our workers, for our team, basically, it's going to look like the following, where it basically takes some admin tasks away from you, right? Kind of that's actually, or speeds some things up, right? Now, that in itself is actually not resulting in a productivity gain. To be kind of perfectly clear, this is resulting in you getting the same stuff done in less time. The productivity
at more
gain,
cost.
Yeah, at more cost. That's
tool.
True. You still have to pay the tool. The productivity gain comes from that you then actually use that surplus time that the tool just gave you to do some other higher value task than you did before. That's the productivity gain, right? And kind of to make it super simple, right? Kind of, when society made the switch from me needing to go to the well to get water to bring it back, not that I had to actually, maybe I should have taken a different example here, to, oh, now the water comes out of the tap. That didn't mean that now I could, chill 2 hours more. What that happened is like, oh, I kind of now did other things in those 2 hours, right? That's how society and productivity grows. It's not by taking longer naps. It's by, being able to do more and more valuable tasks, basically, right? So and that goes a little bit into the phase of like, well, I'm just sitting around to wait for those 8 hours to go away. I think that is also just a managerial issue and a cultural issue, by the way, that we just also need to overcome at the same time.
Although, to be fair, I do think, though, that some of it is not conscious. So
yes,
it's not necessarily that people will say, I will now sit around for 2 hours and hope no one catches me and do nothing. Or I will now take a 1 hour toilet break where nobody can actually catch me. But they will just tend to do more walking around and chatting and check their phone more and check their Instagram a bit more and take longer lunch breaks, which maybe necessarily is not a terrible thing to some degree, because there is also productive stuff happening at the water cooler and maybe during those lunch breaks. But it will just be a little bit of a different behavior. Now, I don't know if that adds up to 2.5 hours a day, but this I've actually seen, where there's a large difference to me, not necessarily in working hours, but in what's happening in those hours. I would rather take a team of people working 6 hours a day, not checking their phones and not wasting their time, than people 10 hours a day in the office who are half the time asleep on their phone.
I totally agree. I think, and I can't rebut that necessarily, but I think the other side to that coin is, being productive also has to do with, the amount of distractions, right? And there's some research done around this. Basically, where do you have more distraction triggers happening, right? And that could be a colleague sitting next to you, tapping on the shoulder, saying, "Hey, Raoul, quick question," right? Or what have you. But those could also be you sitting at home and 1,000 other things around you can happen, and those can cause distractions too, right? I think neither space is free of those. I think everyone can make up their own mind, kind of where those distractions are fewer and or where they're less disturbing, if you will, right? One other thing, that we're not even touching on in the whole how much you work, because it's very much like a employer-driven conversation. You need to work more. Another thing is actually Wall Street Journal found that people that are working remotely basically have their career development negatively impacted, meaning especially new employees or junior employees basically don't benefit from accidental, educational moments or learning moments in the office. And additionally, it's cognitively, emotionally speaking, a lot easier to fire a remote worker than it is someone that's in the office. For all kinds. I mean, we've all been there, and that totally is a thing, right? And from an employee's perspective, working remotely, like there's a whole long tail of psychological isolation and blah, 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 and all of that stuff that I don't want to go into, that actually also has an issue here, right? And I think fairly so. A lot of people are putting this up against the commute time, and I get it. I get it, right? Kind of, I've been commuting in Manhattan for an hour every leg, basically, so 2 hours a day. That wasn't fun at all. Like, don't get me wrong. But there's a balance here. So now, when I was working in the office, it took me like 15 minutes bike ride. It was beneficial for me to go to the, to have a commute, basically. I think there's a balancing here also in how to kind of look at this.
And you just mentioned something which very often is just mentioned as an afterthought, but is, for me personally, my main reason for disliking remote work. And that is the, as you call it, accidental learning. I actually think it's not accidental. I think it will happen when you get people together, the right amount of people, right kind of people with the right culture. And maybe that's very much because that's the way I've always tried to have my culture and build my teams. But there is so much that happens when you get those people together in a room. Not just the tapping on the shoulder and interrupting and wasting each other's time, but a lot of productive things, a lot of accidental knowledge, overhearing things, understanding things more, understanding context, understanding other departments, but also a lot of just social learning, as I would call it. Like part of, and it might be that I was a late bloomer, although I would describe myself as such. Part of my professional development has been me also learning to get along better with people, sharing a space, finding conclusions, listening better, hopefully, arguing better, just discussions all day long. And that has a physical aspect to that. And more of that happens when you are in the office. And these things are, in my understanding, a lot of times what makes people advance their career. Not necessarily just producing that document and making that sale and producing that tech piece of product, but like understanding how to deal with people and how to lead people and seeing leadership examples and seeing bad examples and good examples and discussing with people afterwards and even gossiping. Like all that stuff falls away. And that to me is the glue. When you look at all the productivity and the people and all that, that's the glue that holds teams together. And that is also what propels people to advance in seniority.
Yeah.
I would be like, if I had started remotely, I don't know if I would have had half of the learnings that I had that made me the person that I became.
And anecdotally speaking, super simplified. I've seen now a lot of different sales teams, a lot, and I've yet to see a thriving sales team that is in a fully remote setup.
Yes.
I'm sorry, I just haven't. And I've heard there are those unicorn stories, and I'm sure they exist. Don't get me wrong, right? I'm not doubting that. I just have seen the vast majority not being like this, right? And I think it goes down to the very human level of just, the amount of energy you get from someone else being successful, someone else kind of having energy, kind of the, this bouncing this energy off another, and then kind of driving your motivation and kind of going forward. And the whole accidental learnings that are basically you are listening with half an ear to what someone else is saying on the phone right now, and oh, this was good, I'm going to include this in my pitch going forward, right? All of those things, forget about on a remote setup, right? And probably the list is even longer than that. But it's like, anecdotally speaking, those are other things where I'm like, it's kind of, that part is a little bit clear to me.
By the way, if you're sitting at home listening to this right now and shaking your head so far at all these boomers talking out of their ass and arguing for the old world to come back, that's not the case. But maybe sit for a second and think about where does your disagreement come from? Is it maybe coming from the fact that you really, really, really wish that the opposite were true, and that is why you're arguing differently? Such as you just love remote work for all kinds of different reasons, which I get, even as an employer sometimes. And therefore you go from there and you wish those things not to be true that we're talking about. And that's probably the wrong way to look at it. Like a scientific way is look at the evidence, look at what's working, look at what you've seen, anecdotal as well as scientific evidence. And there's just some glaring mistakes and some glaring holes in remote work, despite what you would like to be true.
And I'm sure there's also research done on some of the upsides. So for example, I think if you're a developer, for example, and have a very specific task that you get through, and the office is actually creating more distractions than at home, then probably there will be time spent at home kind of that is more productive than in the office. But let's kind of jump to, in the interest of time, let's jump to the next thing, because this is the whole remote work thing. The other thing is, and it's been starting to bubble a little bit up, and I started to, double click, and now I found two really interesting pieces I wanted to share. And they're both around AI is making us duh, right?
Surprise.
Let that sink in for a second, right? It's really actually artificial intelligence is reducing our intelligence. That's actually kind of, to a degree, if you use it in a certain way, maybe in a wrong way, that's actually what's happening. Two really cool things. Oh, cool. I don't know. Insightful. There's one, one of my co-founders sent this to me. Hilarious. And basically this was a study, and again, Bart is going to kind of slide this in here probably from the side. A study that was done with experienced open source developers, right? So we're not talking entry-level job or like junior and stuff, Open source, why open source? I don't know. This is the group that could find to test this with, I guess. Basically, they asked the developers and some experts kind of, how much will your productivity increase if you use AI in order to do your work, if you kind of do the coding, right? And those, projections of how much this increases, they ranged between, let's just say, plus 20 to plus 40%, right? Kind of 20 to 40% less time necessary for a specific task, right? Kind of that's basically how that translated. And those were like, machine learning experts that are forecasted that, economics experts that are forecasted that, the developer staff themselves forecasted this. And here comes the developers that were in question, that did the work. They forecasted a 22% reduction in time necessary for a task before they did the experiment. And then they were asked afterwards as well, and they basically said we saw a 20% reduction, only from, instead of 22%, only a 20% reduction in time necessary. And now the thing comes, the actual objective assessment of where they're faster, where they're better, where the quality, yada yada yada, actually concluded that it took them 20% more time to conclude their task, which is absolutely bonkers, right? I think that's also the reason why the co-founder shared it with me, because it's like, it's so weird, right? Not only is everyone intuitively saying, of course, if you can complete this stuff that I otherwise need to write myself, of course it's going to be faster. But not only some random person that knows a little bit about the space did that, the developers themselves before and after the experiment, and even after, where you would think like, oh no, they lived through this, they now know that actually in this experiment it didn't work out, even after they thought it actually was better for them, which is absolutely insane. I think it's absolutely insane. What's your reaction, Lowell?
So my first reaction is thinking about the people who are seeing this and their reaction, because I can already tell you that this is the classic example of someone looking at this or listening to you and being like, yeah, that might be, I mean, maybe they're disputing the study. Okay, cool. But let's say they agree with the study and they're like, yeah, that's true. Not the case for me though. Like when I say I'm more productive with AI, I'm actually more productive with AI. I know that for a fact. Well, just like these developers, experienced developers knew that they're more productive with AI by 20 or 22%. And by the way, I'm not saying that AI can make someone more productive. I'm saying that the assessment and typically the subjective assessment is not really the measure to go by, and is actually not maybe the future that we will land in, because I have both hearts in me, where I'm actually scared to death of where AI will lead us, but I also can see the benefits and I can definitely see the performance improvements. But I also think that we're lying to ourselves of where we're at right now. And there's a lot of optimism, and then there's a lot of make-believe, and a lot of, again, people really wanting to believe and wishing that this were true, but maybe it isn't yet. And some of it is just evil employers trying to fire people and therefore arguing that AI is just good enough. It isn't in most areas. And then some of it is just developers maybe trying to be like future forward looking and trying to make it as it's not. But what I do see definitely is that people are becoming less smart about it, and that's where you're going with that.
Let me then inject the next stunt. So those were 54 students, I don't know, I'm sure it's high school, university, something like that. They were split up into 3 different groups, I think over 4 months. And basically each of these groups, one group had assigned that they could use ChatGPT or LLMs in order to complete tasks like essay writing and these kind of things. The second group was only allowed to use a search engine, so Google, but without AI. And the third group was the brain-only group, right? And they were kind of over time given like tasks and so forth, blah, blah, all cool. Plot twist, in the final exam, so to speak, they changed the tools that each group had access to randomly around. Like each of the people suddenly, people that had OpenAI before suddenly ended up without any tool or only with Google, or maybe some of them kept OpenAI, right? Kind of they basically mixed the whole thing up. So what did they find? They found overall in the OpenAI group or ChatGPT group lower brain activity. They found cognitive debt, which basically is another way of saying because you are not exercising your brain muscle, your muscle is going back. It's getting weaker, right? That's basically what they're saying here, and they're calling it cognitive debt. I would call it like a shrinking brain muscle. They saw the group saw that they consistently lacked at neural, linguistic, and behavioral tasks. They found that there was a loss of critical thinking and writing skill utilization. And they found that executive functions like planning and reasoning were going away. And what really struck me was actually that these essays, because this is where, all this other stuff, how did they figure this out from this essay that they're writing? But, one thing here, which was just insane, is the group that used ChatGPT and then had to create, essays, without ChatGPT. Actually, there was a homogenization of thought, sameness. So people were writing the same essays in the same way, in the same tone, about the same topics. Basically, this could be an outcome of the cognitive debt that's happening, or a bit more of a, hey, that's how you need to think about these things, right? And then the last thing, which I can absolutely relate to, and maybe this is also something we need to discuss, diminished memory retention. So this is something that is to a degree called also digital amnesia. And basically what we have, all collectively happily done is we don't remember facts anymore. Like brains are really shitty at that anyway. And I just can Google it. If I know where it is, I can find it. All right. So I don't need to memorize all of those facts. Well, the same thing is happening now with intellectual capabilities. It's like if I don't need to, think through all of these things, if the machines are doing it for me, then I can just, give it there. And, that then leads to not only getting weaker, but also having, slower, worse memory of what you've been doing. So this was a whole slew of things that I just threw at you. Isn't this crazy?
Especially the last one. So everyone, I said I'm scared to death of AI and where it will lead us, and I don't think it's going to be a good place overall, unfortunately. But part of the reason why maybe me, but most other people are fear-mongering and really scared about this is AI will become smarter than us. And there's always the narrative of AI will become smarter than us because AI will become smarter and smarter. And eventually it will be so smart that it goes exponential and then it makes itself smarter and iterates on itself and then we're all screwed. Well, maybe that's true. But what seems to be true is that we just keep lowering the barrier. So maybe one way AI will be smarter than us is not necessarily only that it itself becomes smarter, but that we just become willingly dumber and happily so. And that is just scary to me, to be honest. And it's mostly scary. It's funny in a way. I can find the humor in it. I can also find how it's interesting. It's just not the society I want to live in. And so, how many of our cognitive functions are we willing to just piss away and give away to these machines? And we're doing so happily running into this.
So let's play the oblivious individual, and let's also play the super harsh money counting employer, so to speak.
Yeah.
So why should I personally care that my cognitive functions are decreasing, right? And to a degree, you could say that, well, since we have electricity everywhere and since we have machines doing all kind of stuff for us, everyone is getting fatter. Everyone is having back problems because they're sitting all day. Even from that revolution, we had some negative side effects. Isn't this just another negative side effect of a new technical revolution? And it absolutely totally is. But to a degree, you know, I can still go to the gym. I'm not sure if that analogy really translates well to your cognitive functions. I'm not so sure about that. And maybe you just need to play Sudoku a little bit more often or something. I'm not sure what it is. But, you know, losing your cognitive abilities, I don't think this is a, well, you know, I can live without it kind of situation. Maybe that's just me though.
Or think about it as I'm not, you are a parent. Think about your children's cognitive abilities, just as you're thinking maybe about their physical health. Think about their development that they're taking. Think about their social, language, mathematical, just scientific development, but in general, like cognitive abilities. And if you're not a parent, think about your own. So they have this saying where, I don't know if I subscribe to that, but there is a saying that's been very, very pervasive. AI won't take your job, but someone with a job using AI will take your job, right? And maybe you've heard this or maybe not. I think it's possibly more, if that's true at all, some intelligent person using AI will take your tool. And so the idea here is, well, let's assume we're all going to succumb to the AI overlords, and that's what we'll all have to deal with, or we're gonna be jobless. The people who are then going to win are the ones who are going to be smart about using AI. So either way, if you want to remain competitive, if you want your children to remain competitive, whatever the future holds, which nobody knows, it's probably a good idea to be cognitively functioning well.
So, and that is a good intro to why should I as an employer care that my people are getting dumber and dumber. I mean, like, do I care if the intelligence is coming from a human being or a computer? I don't kind of care as long as I get the intelligence. So number one, I think we're still pretty far away from that thing to be as smart as we are. I'm using AI a lot in different areas. I have lots of experience where, I tried to have a really intelligent conversation with it, and for some reason we ended up in like a we and blah kind of space. So just giving AI the instruction, hey, fix this problem, or hey, make this website look good, or kind of build this app, it doesn't actually work like that. You still need to have the cognitive function currently of a human being to help alongside of that, right? So, and maybe this is coming in 10 years, I don't know, 5 years or something like that, but it's for sure not happening right now. But those stats, this research, those effects, they're happening right now, right? So at the very least, you should probably have however you kind of believe in AI being kind of getting to this level, there certainly is a gap between, what is happening right now and kind of at what point something else can take over, right? And then there's the other camp, I think, where, we don't know yet, but maybe humans will play a longer term role. In building organizations, building companies. Maybe there isn't going to be this whole AI thing happening, which kind of, I'm part of that camp, by the way. So long term, probably not a great idea to have your cognitive functions of your employees degrade over time, right? And I think that's why, if you take those two effects into account, remote work and the impact of that, and we talked about you probably very likely work less. You maybe learn less on the job. Maybe you kind of have less motivation and energy from other people around you. Plus, hey, this AI thing is kind of happening and it's making us a little bit dumber, or maybe a lot dumber overall. If you combine those two things together, like, that's a significant productivity hit we're actually currently experiencing and taking. Like, and think about it on a company level. Like, that's actually kind of massive. And I think no one is talking about it like this or connecting those two pieces together. We're all talking about the next AI app that's going to shave 20% of admin work from everyone in your team. And all of that is cool. But there's this other background radiation thing that's happening at the same time that is maybe impacting this whole thing overall on a much larger scale that we are kind of currently oblivious to, right? And I think that's why we want to also bring this up for everyone to kind of see that.
It's quite scary stuff, actually. And so maybe that's being too romantic and you might criticize me for that. But let's say you are this successful capitalist, either as a founder and you win capitalism, you bring this company forward, you create it, and then you make 100 million or 200 or however much money you really want to make. Then what? like you're gonna have children. You're gonna want to live in this world somehow, somewhere. What kind of society are you trying to build, and what kind of like people do you want to have around you? And this is not me making this grand scheme pitch for like corporate social responsibility, but just from an own egoistical perspective. If I have this big leverage on the world, do I want to create a world where basically everyone around me is jobless and I have to live in the fortress, guarded by security guards, and up high in the tower with my 100 million and my kids walled off of the world? We can't even go to the zoo. We can't even go out and travel the world. Or do I want to live in a world that's as smart and as intelligent and cognitively functioning as possible? So either, and again, take it as romanticism, but I do actually believe this very strongly, that as someone who's an entrepreneur building a company, what you have in addition to a company is also leverage on the world. And but just by that fact alone, you have a responsibility, and it's your choice how you use that. And I know for a fact some people will be, even if they don't admit it, they would be very happy with being a technocrat in the future and just sitting in an ivory tower, growing up their children in a school, separated from the rest of society and not having to deal with anyone. And that's okay. But I don't think that everyone has that, and I definitely don't.
I don't think we have the solutions here on the show today. I think there's certainly some takeaways around, hey, there's something happening you need to be aware of. Number one. Number two is, hey, take this AI adoption with a bit of a grain of salt. Think about how to actually use this. Think about how to use it in a way to preserve your cognitive function, so to speak. And I think the other thing is, you should be trying to get your folks back into the office. Like you certainly should. I think it has a productivity impact. And maybe we end it here, Ro.
Let's do that.
Thank you everyone for listening. It was a longer episode. I hope you stuck with us through this here. And see you soon on a more positive note, probably. Cheers.
Thanks everyone.
Next week, Roel and I are going to talk about some pretty deep work that we've been busy with for the last 4 to 6 months. We're going to go into what that is specifically, how that is very likely affecting you right now, and what you can do about it to fix it. I'm being extremely cryptic here by design, but if you want the full story and you don't want to miss it, then hit subscribe and see you next week.